Hello and welcome to Carcassonne Online.
Glad to be here for this deep dive.
So I want you to imagine looking up at a harsh, just a really arid rocky spine in the Montagne Noire.
Right, the Black Mountain.
Exactly. And you look up at this precipice and you see not one but four distinct medieval fortresses just balancing on the edge, daring anyone to approach.
It's a striking image. And, it's not a fairy tale castle setting.
No, not at all. Today we're looking at the Castles of Lastours. And to really set the tone, picture a line of 100 mutilated men.
Yeah. The prisoners of Bram.
Right. Their eyes have been gouged out, their noses and upper lips just sliced off. And they are being led across this dry, rocky valley in southern France.
Guided by one single man who was left with just one eye.
Just one eye so he could physically lead them. And their destination is the base of that 300-meter cliff. They were being used as a warning to the people living at the very top.
It is a grim way to start, but, well, it's necessary. It's so easy to romanticize medieval stone,
Oh, definitely. We see weathered walls and blue skies, and think of knights in shining armor.
Right. But the reality of Lastours, located in the Occitanie region, is just steeped in brutal survival. It's about industrial labor, religious warfare, and, well, an unforgiving geography.
Which brings us to our mission for this deep dive. I've got this whole stack of sources here. Archaeological records, tourism guides, historical accounts of the Albigensian Crusade. We are going to guide you through the bloody, rebellious history of Lastours.
And we're going to unpack the mechanics of it, why this specific rock.
Exactly. We want to prove exactly why this site is an absolute, a mandatory must-visit location for anyone traveling through the Odd Department.
Because to understand the sieges and the eventual royal takeover, you really have to understand the canvas first. The rock itself.
So let's set that scene. Lastours, which for most of its history is actually called Cabaret, sits about 18 kilometers north of Carcassonne.
Up at an altitude of 300 meters.
Right. But the thing that really dictates the history here is the footprint. This rocky spur is just 400 meters long and only 50 meters wide at its maximum.
Yeah, think about that width for a second. 50 meters is roughly half a football field.
That's tiny.
It really is. That is all the horizontal space they had to work with. And it's flanked on both sides by these near-vertical drops down to the Orbiel River and the Gressalou Torrent.
So if you're listening and wondering why anyone would build a town on a waterless spine of rock that's 50 meters wide, I mean, it wasn't just to hide, right?
No, not at all. It was an economic engine. Geology is destiny here.
Okay, unpack that for us.
Well, the Montagne Noire is the southwestern tip of the Massif Central, and it sits right on a geological contact zone.
Meaning
you have ancient sedimentary limestone meeting metamorphic schist. When those tectonic plates push together over millions of years, the heat and pressure create heavy concentrations of metallic ores.
So the mountain is just packed with resources.
Exactly. Veins of iron, copper, silver, lead, gold. This ridge was the medieval equivalent of an oil field.
Wow.
It was an industrial gold mine, literally. And the mining didn't start with medieval lords.
Right. I read that it goes back thousands of years.
Oh, easily. We have solid evidence of Roman mining right nearby. The copper mine of Barinx was active in the 2nd century BC, and this went on until our modern era. The Salsine gold mine near there didn't close until 2004.
2004. That's staggering. From chipping away at copper before the Roman Empire to modern machinery shutting down just a couple of decades ago?
The continuous heartbeat of the area is industry.
But there's this specific archaeological find that just completely shifts how we view the area's connection to the ancient world. And it actually starts with a local legend.
Ah, yes, the Trou de Lastier.
The whole of the city. So underneath these medieval ruins, the limestone is full of natural caves. And local folklore always talked about this one cave. The story was that there was a secret tunnel connecting it directly to Carcassonne.
Which is, physically impossible.
18 kilometers of solid bedrock tunnel.
Right. It would challenge modern tunnel boring machines. It's really just a myth born from the psychology of living on an isolated peak. You invent stories about secret connections.
But the funny thing is, in 1961, archaeologists decided to dig in that cave anyway. And they didn't find a tunnel, but they found something arguably much more valuable.
A grave.
Yeah, the grave of a young girl from the Middle Bronze Age. Around 1700 to 1600 BC.
The Princess Collier, the princess with the necklace.
Right, and when we think of Bronze Age cave burials, I think we usually picture maybe some crude flint or clay, but her jewelry was highly sophisticated. She had amber, bronze beads, and glass paste.
And the material composition is what matters there. During the Bronze Age, amber mostly came from the Baltic Sea region in northern Europe.
Okay.
And that glass paste, that manufacturing was heavily concentrated in the eastern Mediterranean. It shows early Egyptian and Greek influences.
So wait, how does an Egyptian-style glass bead and Baltic amber end up on a child in a remote mountain cave in southern France?
Well, it proves it wasn't remote. The Montagne Noire was plugged into this vast continental trade network 4,000 years ago. The Orbiel River flows into the Aude, which goes to the Mediterranean. It was a highway.
They traded minerals down the river, and luxury goods came up.
Exactly. The princess's necklace is physical proof of the site's massive economic gravity.
It's just a huge perspective shift. We think of castles as old, but this site was an ancient, wealthy hub of international trade millennia before the first knight put on armor.
It really was, and that wealth, the ore in the ground, is what drove the medieval expansion.
Let's jump forward to that, the 11th and 12th centuries. The site is known as Cabaret.
And it's a booming industrial center, driven by iron mining.
So paint a picture for us, because it wasn't the four neat ruins we see today. If I walked up there in 1150, what am I looking at?
You'd see a dense, loud, smoky settlement. There were three primary, somewhat rudimentary castles on the slopes, not on the very top crest. And clustered around them was the castrum.
Let's define castrum for the listener. How is it different from a normal village?
A standard village might be spread out in a valley with open fields. A castrum is a fortified, integrated settlement. The geography forces everything together. The miners' houses, the forges, the communal ovens, the church, all packed shoulder to shoulder inside a defensive wall, right under the Lord's protection.
And it was successful. They even had an official market operating inside by 1145.
Yeah.
But the governance of this place is what really stands out to me.
The peerage system.
Right. There's a text from 1166 that says the lordship of Cabaret wasn't held by one baron, it was held by 22 co-lords.
22 co-seigneurs, yes. In southern France, they had this tradition of shared lordship. Up north, the oldest son inherited everything. But in the south, they often divided it among all the children.
So over a few generations, a wealthy site gets split up over and over. But logistically, how does that work? You can't chop 3 small castles into 22 pieces. Do they take turns sleeping in the master bedroom?
Well, they divided the revenues, not necessarily the physical rooms. They shared the river tolls, the market taxes, the mining yields. Some might have built small fortified houses inside the walls.
Okay, that makes sense financially. But politically, getting 22 bosses to agree on anything sounds like a nightmare.
It was a huge buffer against outside interference.
Yeah.
If a king or a bishop wanted to control Cabaret, they didn't have one guy to bribe. They had to negotiate with a syndicate of 22 wealthy nobles.
It bred a massive culture of independence.
Exactly. They were financially secure, militarily safe on their cliff, and very autonomous, which made Cabaret the perfect incubator for Catharism.
Yes, the Cathars. We have to dive into this because it's central to the region's history. Who were they, and why did the Catholic Church hate them so much?
The Cathars were a Christian sect in the Languedoc, and their core theology was dualism. They believed in 2 equal gods, a good God who created the spiritual realm, and an evil God who they often equated with Satan, who created the physical, material world.
So everything physical is evil.
Right. The flesh, the earth, wealth, all domain of the evil creator. The soul is just trapped in a physical prison.
That's a radical departure from standard doctrine.
It's very. And it dictated how their spiritual elite, known as the perfects, lived. They took a sacrament called the consolamentum, and after that, they lived in extreme asceticism. No property, complete celibacy, and a strict vegan diet.
Wait, vegan? In the Middle Ages?
Yes, no meat, dairy, or eggs, because those are products of physical reproduction, which ties back to the material world.
Wow. So compare that to a Catholic bishop at the time. The bishop is wearing silk, covered in gold, demanding heavy tithes from poor peasants.
And wielding huge political power.
Exactly. And then you see a Cathar perfect in a simple dark robe, owning nothing, preaching that the wealthy Catholic Church is literally the synagogue of Satan.
You can see why the local peasants viewed the perfects as the actual holy men. The message resonated across all classes. The peasants respected their poverty, and the nobles, well, they were quite happy to stop paying tithes to Rome.
Which brings us back to our 22 lords on the rock. They basically ignored the Pope when he said to root out the heresy.
Yeah, whether they were devout Cathars themselves or just fiercely independent, Cabaret became a fortified sanctuary. They openly housed Cathar perfects. High-ranking Cathar bishops like Arnaud Hot and Pierre Aison took refuge there.
But sheltering heretics was incredibly dangerous, because in 1209, the Pope calls for the Albigensian Crusade.
And we should clarify, this wasn't a crusade to the Holy Land.
Right, this was a holy war directing northern French knights to march south and attack other Christians within modern-day France.
The theological goal was wiping out Catharism. The practical motivation for the northern lords was wealth. If you declare a southern noble a heretic, his lands are forfeit. It was a massive land grab.
Led by Simon de Montfort, a guy known for being absolutely ruthless.
He was a very severe, highly disciplined military commander, and as he sweeps south, he eventually targets the iron-rich ridge of Cabaret.
And the local leader in Cabaret is Pierre Roger de Cabaret, a guy who really understood his geography.
He was a brilliant tactician. He didn't just hide behind his walls.
Which is what you'd expect, right? An army of thousands shows up, you lock the gates.
But he used the rugged terrain to launch ambushes on the Crusader supply lines. And during one of these sorties, he captures Bouchard de Marly.
And Bouchard isn't just a foot soldier.
No, Bouchard is a high-ranking Crusader lord. And crucially, he's a cousin and close confidant of Simon de Montfort.
So Pierre Roger drags Bouchard up the cliff, locks him in the castle, and just looks down at Montfort's army. Suddenly, Montfort has a huge problem.
A massive logistical and personal problem. He can't just bombard the castle with trebuchets without risking his cousin's life.
Plus, taking that rock by force is a nightmare anyway.
Exactly. You can't dig tunnels under the walls because it's solid bedrock. You can't roll siege towers up a 50-meter wide spine. A direct assault would mean massive casualties.
So Montfort abandons conventional tactics. He decides to use psychological warfare.
Which leads back to the atrocity we discussed at the start. Montfort lifted the siege, marched to the nearby village of Bram, and captured it.
And he takes exactly 100 prisoners from Bram. He gouges out their eyes, slices off their noses and upper lips.
Removing the lips was a specific detail. It left the victims with this permanent, horrifying grimace. It was designed to strip away their humanity.
It's just horrific. He leaves one man with one eye to guide them and sends them walking back to Lastours.
The message was explicit. This is what will happen to every person inside Cabaret if you don't surrender and give me my cousin.
I try to put myself on that wall. You're a villager, you hear the moaning, you see these bleeding men stumbling up the path. It's meant to induce immediate panic, but it backfires, doesn't it?
We call it strategic blowback. Montfort totally misunderstood the psychology of a highly motivated community.
Because he changed the stakes.
Right. Before this, surrender meant paying higher taxes and losing some autonomy. After seeing those men, surrender meant torture and mutilation.
He removed the incentive to give up. The villagers realized exactly what was waiting for them at the bottom of the hill.
So they locked the gates and prepared to fight to the death. The terror tactic failed completely. Montfort had to abandon the siege in 1210.
But he doesn't go far. He moves over to tackle Château de Termes.
Tams was another massive stronghold, but it had a fatal flaw: its water supply. After months of siege, they ran out of clean water, got hit by dysentery, and fell in late 1210.
And that changes the map for Pierre Roger.
It shifted the logistics entirely. Montfort no longer had a second front. He could focus his entire army and all his siege engines on Cabaret. Pierre Roger knew he was isolated.
A prolonged siege now meant starvation. But he still has leverage. He has Bouchard.
Yes. In 1211, Pierre Roger opens negotiations. He offers a trade: a peaceful surrender of Cabaret, no Crusader casualties, and Bouchard is released unharmed.
In exchange for
Favorable terms. He keeps his life, his freedom, and he was actually granted lands elsewhere as compensation. Montfort, wanting his cousin back and wanting the strategic ridge, agreed.
But the locals didn't just accept this.
No, the Languedoc remained deeply hostile. In 1218, Simon de Montfort is actually killed at the siege of Toulouse, struck in the head by a stone from a trebuchet.
And the southern lords jump at the chance. By 1223, local forces, including Pierre Roger, attack and retake Cabaret.
They took their mountain back. It became a sanctuary again, even the official seat of the Cathar bishop of the region. It was a massive rejection of the French crown.
But it couldn't last forever. The French king, Louis IX, decides to bring the full weight of the state down on the south.
Lastours held out until 1229, and then there's one final rebellion in 1240 led by the old Viscount's son. The people of Lastours supported it, but it failed.
And that's when the King of France decides he's had enough. He decides to wipe Cabaret off the map.
This is the pivot. We go from a living, breathing industrial town to a sterile, controlled military base. The king orders the 3 original castles destroyed, but also the total eradication of the castrum.
Think about the manual labor that it requires. You have to dismantle a stone village built into a mountain.
They forced the locals to tear down their own homes. The forges, the church, the walls. They broke the foundations down to the bedrock so it could never be used for cover again. They even destroyed the cemetery.
And they forced the survivors across the river into a new, unfortified valley town laid out on a grid, easy to monitor, which is the modern village of Lastours today. It's medieval, urban renewal by force.
An act of profound psychological dominance erased their history. But the king still needed to control the iron mines and the high ground, so his engineers start building on the highest crest of the rock.
And they build the 4 sentinels we see today. Let's take the listener on a virtual tour of this architecture. We have 4 fortresses. Let's start at the north end, Cabaret.
Cabaret was the main citadel. It housed the royal garrison, the commander, a chaplain, a master carpenter, and its defining feature is a pentagonal keep.
A 5-sided tower. Why build a complex 5-sided building on a narrow ridge instead of a simple square?
Military physics. The pointed edge, the prow, faces the most likely approach path. If an enemy trebuchet launches a boulder at a flat wall, the wall absorbs all the kinetic energy. The mortar shatters.
But if it hits an angled wall?
It glances off. It deflects the projectile. It's the same principle as sloped armor on a modern tank. Cabaret also had a barbican, an outer wall that forces attackers into a tight corridor where they can be shot from above.
Right next to it is the Tour Regine, the Queen's Tower.
The name itself is propaganda, a permanent statement of royal supremacy. It's the smallest, basically a tall, cylindrical tower.
But historians point out it looks like it was ordered from a catalog.
It is a standardized Capetian design. It's practically identical to the towers being built down the road at the Cité de Carcassonne. Same white limestone, same arrow slit dimensions.
And it has a spiral staircase inside the wall to save space. But its most important feature is hidden underground, the largest cistern on the site.
We have to talk about water. A garrison on a 300-meter spine of solid rock has a huge vulnerability. You can't dig a well.
Right, there's no groundwater.
Your only water is rain. So the roofs and courtyards were designed as massive water catchment systems, funneling rain through terracotta pipes into these deep vaults.
Which brings us to the third castle, Surdspine, or Thornflower. It's the highest up and the most ruined today. But the cisterns here show off this incredible ancient technology.
The walls of those cisterns are lined with a material called tulo,
which gives it this distinct pinkish-orange color. What is tulo?
It's a mix of standard lime mortar and finely crushed terracotta like broken roof tiles. Adding the fired clay changes the chemistry. It turns it into hydraulic mortar.
Meaning it cures underwater and becomes completely waterproof.
Yes. If they used regular mortar, the rainwater would seep into the porous limestone over the dry summer and the garrison would die of thirst. The tulo creates a perfect seal. It's Roman technology applied by medieval engineers.
Surdspine also has these rare murder holes, right?
Yes, openings above the gateways so defenders could drop heavy stones or boiling liquids straight down on anyone trying to break the doors.
Then we get to the fourth castle, Carcassonne. It's not in a straight line with the others. It's on its own isolated pinnacle slightly to the south.
It's the advance guard. Because it's pushed out, it has a perfect view of the approach paths. It actually looks right down on the ruins of the Romanist church the king destroyed, and its main defense is a chicane entrance.
Okay, a chicane. That's a deliberate bottleneck.
Right. The path to the gate forces attackers to navigate a sharp, narrow curve turning right. In combat, a soldier holds his weapon in his right hand and his shield in his left.
So turning right exposes their unshielded side.
Exactly. It exposes their right side to the defenders on the walls above. It's designed to maximize casualties.
So we have these 4 highly specialized mini-castles. Why didn't the king just build one massive wall around the whole rock?
The terrain didn't allow it. The spine undulates. It has peaks and dips. Leveling it would take impossible labor. Building 4 separate structures, let them anchor each one to a natural high point. It's an economy of means.
Let the mountain do half the work. But it's also strategically brilliant, isn't it? Like a security system with overlapping fire.
Exactly. Active defense in depth. If you breach Carcassonne, the garrison in Surdspine, which is higher up, just rains arrows down on you. If Surdspine falls, Tour Regine provides covering fire.
A cascading defense.
Plus, the alignment creates a psychological weapon, a trompe-l'oeil effect. From the valley, the optical illusion makes the 4 distinct castles look like one massive, continuous, impregnable wall.
You look up and realize taking it is mathematically impossible. And it worked. They stood as the military center of the region for centuries.
Until the borders of France shifted south and heavy cannons made high-altitude stone castles obsolete. The garrisons left, the roofs collapsed, and they became romantic ruins overlooking the industrial valley.
And that industrial layer is the perfect bridge to today, because we want to make it clear why visiting Lastours is the ultimate must-do experience in Occitanie.
It's a very active sensory journey.
You don't just take a photo from a bus. It starts before you even hit the trail. The visitor center is in the old Rabier factory, a restored 19th century textile mill on the river.
The juxtaposition is notable. You park at a brick smokestack from the Industrial Revolution to go see 13th century castles.
And inside, you see the archaeological finds. The amber beads from the Bronze Age princess, the iron keys and tools from the destroyed 11th century village. It really grounds you.
Then the physical exertion starts. It's a 2-kilometer hike, and you have to climb 350 stone steps.
Which is roughly 65 flights of stairs. It's a real workout, but the environment is so rich.
You're hiking through Mediterranean flora, the garrigue.
If you haven't smelled garrigue, it's this low scrub wild thyme, rosemary, juniper, lavender, just baking in the sun. It is the essence of southern France.
And you walk through the shade of home oaks. But visually, the most defining thing besides the ruins are the cypress trees.
But they aren't ancient. Right.
No, they were planted in the 1930s. Centuries of mining and cutting wood for the forges left the mountain totally bare. The cypresses were planted to stop erosion.
But aesthetically, their tall, needle-like shapes mirror the Cowers perfectly. It adds this dramatic verticality.
It really does.
So think about that timeline. You start in a 19th century factory, you hike through a 1930s forest, you walk past the excavated foundations of an 11th century village, you stand in a 13th century royal military base, and underneath is a 4,000-year-old Bronze Age cave.
It's a workout for your legs and your brain. And for those who can't do the 65 flights, there's a great alternative. The Belvedere viewpoint on the D701 road.
Just 2 kilometers away. It gives you this sweeping panorama where you can really see that trompe-l'oeil effect.
And if you do hike up, they use technology brilliantly. The PaceCath app uses augmented reality. You hold your phone up, and it overlays the intact 13th century walls over the ruins.
Plus, the Castrum app for kids. They can run around with digital swords while you examine the pink toulouse in the cisterns. It's multi-generational.
Looking back at this whole deep dive, there's a continuous thread. The wealth of the earth, copper, and iron drew people to this harsh ridge. It funded 22 lords who defied the Pope and sheltered the Cathars.
We saw Montfort try to use terror with the mutilated men from Bram and how it failed against the Stone of Cabaret.
And how the French king finally wiped the village away, replacing it with 4 brilliant machines of war.
It's a dense story of extraction, rebellion, and engineering. And I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. Today, thousands of people hike up there and marvel at the architectural genius of those 4 sentinels.
The Queen's Tower, the Pentagonal Keep.
Right. We take photos of them. But we have to remember those towers were built by the conquerors. They were tools of oppression designed to subjugate the locals whose thriving, independent village was completely erased and buried under our boots.
It's a heavy context.
So when we stand on that ridge and admire those magnificent ruins, are we celebrating the defiant, independent spirit of the region? Or are we simply standing in awe of the very empire that crushed it? If you enjoyed this podcast, don't forget to subscribe and share it widely.